Hey y'all, it's Melissa, author of the blog Melly Sews and designer behind Blank Slate Patterns. Today's project is this t-shirt that I'm wearing. We're actually going to make it in this fabric. And you might notice I have several machines in front of me. That's because today I thought I would show you the differences between these machines and how I use all three to sew a t-shirt. So I've got my regular sewing machine, I've got a serger, and I've got a cover stitch machine. Now, I want you to know that you can sew this whole project just with your regular sewing machine. But I thought it would be fun to show you, in case you've never seen, what a serger does and what a cover stitch machine does and how those can also be useful. So I've got a link down in the description, and if you can see it, it's also up here, a little note. And you can go get the pattern for this t-shirt. There's also a linked blog post with a whole bunch more information, including information about these machines, what they do, and how I use them today. So go ahead and get that pattern, get your supplies together, and then let's get sewing. So the first machine we're going to use is called an overlocker or a serger. The one I use is a Baby Lock Imagine, and this is a 4-thread serger, and it has something called jet air threading, which makes the loopers a little easier to thread. We're going to use this machine for most of the t-shirt. This is going to sew our shoulder seams, our side seams, and we're going to use it to sew in our sleeves. So let me go ahead and get this plugged in, and then we will start sewing the t-shirt. So the first thing we want to do with our t-shirt is we're going to put the front and the back right sides together. Now the fabric I'm using, there's no right and wrong side, so it may be hard to tell, but I've got them what's going to be the outside together. And we're going to sew across the shoulder seams. A serger here cuts off, if there's a little blade right here, and it cuts off the edges of the fabric as you sew. So you get this nice finished seam. And then the other reason it's really great for sewing knits, this is why I prefer to use this if I'm sewing a t-shirt, is that the stitch that it makes, this overlock stitch where it loops thread around the edge or over the edge of the fabric, is inherently stretchy. So it's great for knits because that stitch is going to stretch even when you are doing non-stretch thread. The stitch will stretch with your shirt, which is exactly what you want when you're sewing with knits. So let me show you here what a serger does. You're going to see I don't pick up the foot to put my fabric under. It just kind of sucks it in. You can pick up the foot, but generally I don't. And then you can see as I'm sewing that these little edges here are getting cut off. Now, also unlike a sewing machine, when you're stitching on a serger, you can't just stop at the end of the fabric and cut the thread and pull. Because all of these threads lock together, that's why it's called an overlock, you have to keep chaining off. So you sew past the edge and you see this thread chain coming out of my machine, and then you can cut that. I do make sure that if I'm just cutting the edge like that, that this is going to be covered by another seam or another line of stitching to make sure that all gets locked in. And then you'll also see, here at the beginning of my stitch, I had a chain that I started with, and that was what was left over from the last seam I sewed. So you can see the stitch here. This is the front side of it. There are 2 lines of straight stitching you can see, and on the back it just looks like loops. And I'll make sure to, in the blog post that I'm going to link about this project, I'll make sure to have some close-ups of what a serged stitch looks like. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to sew the other shoulder seam, and then I'm going to be putting the sleeves in. Okay, this is my favorite way to put in sleeves when I am sewing t-shirts. I open the t-shirt up flat, here's the neck hole, and you can see I'm looking at the armhole edge here. What I'm going to do is lay this t-shirt down right side up, and then I'm going to get my sleeve And if your sleeve pattern has a front and a back, like this particular pattern does, make sure that you're lining up the front edge with the front of the sleeve and the back edge with the back. On a serger, you don't want to use pins because if the pin hits your blade, it's going to nick the blade and it's going to cut the pin and it's going to make a mess. So these are Wonder clips, and I'm just going to clip the top edge of my sleeve in place, and so you'll see it looks like this. This is the right side of my shirt, and then there is the top peak of my sleeve, and I'm just going to have that clipped right sides together, and then I'll come over here and I'm going to line up those edges of the sleeve and the armhole, and I'm not even going to pin. I'm just going to line this up little by little with my fingers, and then I am going to sew that seam. Now, I would not recommend going straight to the serger with seams like this if you've never done a t-shirt before or if you're not very confident in what you're doing. It is absolutely okay to sew any seam first on a regular sewing machine so you're not cutting off that extra fabric, and then check your work before you go to the serger to get that final finish on there. Okay, so here you go, where you can see that I've now got one sleeve attached. And this is called attaching it flat, and that's just what I did there. You can see the seam sewn into the armhole there. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to fold this shirt wrong sides together, and I'm going to match that underarm seam, clip it, and then I can now sew this entire edge, that whole edge, in one long seam. And here we go. Here's the inside out t-shirt, and I've got this one long side seam sewn, and that stitch is stretchy, like it's not going to pop if my t-shirt gets pulled on. So that's sewing with a serger. Now again, you absolutely do not have to have a serger to sew knits. You can use a stretch stitch or a zigzag stitch on a regular sewing machine. Okay, y'all, I've switched to the regular sewing machine to sew the V neckband into the neckline. I'm not going to turn it around and show you all the features. If you watch any of my other videos, you've seen this machine. I sew on a Baby Lock Elizabeth. That's my main regular sewing machine. So I've gone ahead and done a couple things to prepare to sew this V in. First of all, I've taken the neckband and I folded it right sides together, and I went ahead and I sewed the edge. After you've done that, after you've sewn the peak here, you want to make sure to clip right into as close as you can get to that stitching line. And then we're going to take the V neckband, we're going to press it open, press the seams open, and then here, if we fold it in half, this is our V neckband. And it's easier to attach all at once. I'm also going to trim these extra, now that we've got it pressed open, these extra seam allowance pieces that are sticking off. So you can see I've got a nice V there that is going to fit into the neckline. You want to measure on this and be really precise, and 1/2 inch up. Just stick a pin through there. That mark, because this has 1/2 inch seam allowances, that mark is where you're going to want to line it up with your shirt to make sure this V ends up exactly like you want it. On the shirt, I went ahead and off camera, I did basting stitches. And by the way, you may have noticed that I just sewed with a straight stitch down this V. That's because we don't really want this part to stretch anyway, so it's okay to use a straight stitch. I also use a straight basting stitch here so that I can see exactly where my V neckband is going to get stitched into this collar. So now what I want to do is I want to put these right sides together, and since this neckband has no right or wrong side, that makes it easier. I want to make sure that where the pin is sticking through here, that I want to make sure it goes in the point of the stitching too, like the lowest point there. And we're going to pin these together. That's going to hold that in place to remind us that that's exactly how we want that centered. Oh wait, I forgot one other thing. Just like we clipped the stitching on the neckband, we need to clip the shirt right into the point of that V also. Okay, so you see how I did that, and then now we want to get the neckband and the shirt matched up. Now you'll notice, like, since I clipped that, there's not really anything for me to pin into, so you may have to go a little sideways with your pin. It's okay, we're not going to sew over that one. That one's just holding our place, basically. And then what you want to do is be able to turn the neckband so that you can match the rest of it around. And you're going to continue pinning. You want to make sure that the center back of the neckband, which, here we go, let's mark the center back. Center back of the neckband is here. And I want to make sure that that spot ends up lining up with the center back of my shirt. So let's go ahead and we'll pin all the way around. Now the neckband is a little bit less in length than the shirt, so you do want to stretch it slightly to get it to fit, and that just makes sure that the shirt draws in close to your body around the neckband. Okay, so I've got that side pinned. Now, if we flip it around here, you can see the other, you can sort of see, it's hard. But as long as you make sure that you've still got your pin point lined up with your stitching point, you can rotate this if need be. So you saw how I rotated it to start pinning this first side here. Now I'm going to rotate to pin the other side of the V. And we're going to go all the way around. Back to where I've got that back neckline lined up. Okay. So you can see now I've got the V neckband pinned all the way around. Now the trick to sewing this is to start at this spot and rotate and then go all the way around, and then as you're getting back to that spot, make sure that the dot right there, which is where my pin is going in, that is the exact spot that your needle stops and starts for this whole thing. So we're going to do this on the sewing machine, the regular one, and we're going to do it with a zigzag stitch. And I'm also using that 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to do a pretty long zigzag stitch and then a narrow zigzag width. So I'm setting this to 3 millimeters long and then 1.5 wide. Okay, so here's the V-neck back off the machine here, and really, like I said, the only trick is lining up those points and then starting here and sewing around and ending there. You're going to want to remove that basting thread that was on the V before you sewed it, and then on the inside here, since you started and stopped in the same place, you may want to knot those together before cutting that thread. And you can see, let me just get this cut. You can see how we got those points just right together, and that was the thread from where I started. And that clipping to the stitching line allowed this to expand so that it could go right around that V. Now if you want, at this point, you definitely need to press this. You probably want to trim some of that seam allowance bulk down. And then you may want to go back and do just a little line of very narrow zigzag top stitching on top to kind of press that seam allowance away from the V and keep your t-shirt with the V-neck away from you. The last machine I'm going to show you is this one. This is called a cover stitch machine. This is used to create a stretchy hem or a chain stitch. You see I've got mine set up with 3 thread cones right now. You can use 2, 3, or 4 threads. And the main difference between this and a regular sewing machine is that instead of having a straight stitch running along the bottom, this has a looper. So it's similar to a serger in that it has a looper, but the looper doesn't loop around the edge of the fabric, it loops on the bottom, and because it's a series of connected loops, if you've ever seen crochet, like a crocheted chain stitch, it looks like that. With the other side, the front side, being a straight stitch. So it has the appearance of a straight stitch on one side, and then on the other side it has the loop so that it stretches. It also does not trim the fabric as you sew like the serger does. This is why it's good for hems. A serger isn't really useful for hemming because it trims that edge. So the only way to do a hem with a serger is either a rolled hem that's going around the edge where there's visible stitching, and that's very handy sometimes, or to do a flat locked hem, which is where you'll see like a bunch of vertical stitches next to each other. It's used sometimes decoratively as a hem. The cover stitch is the one that does the hem that you're probably most familiar with seeing on store-bought knitwear. And it looks usually like 2 or 3 lines of straight stitching on the front, and then the back resembles a serger stitching with a loop kind of going back and forth between those 2 rows of straight stitching. Some sergers convert to cover stitch machines. So you'll see sergers sometimes that have like 5 threads or up to 8 threads, and those are sergers that are going to convert into a cover stitch machine. They'll have this piece that you can put back on so that you cover the bed and you don't have that exposed blade cutting the edge like you would when you're using it as a serger. I prefer to have 2 separate machines because I can switch back and forth easily between the machines without having to take the time to get one machine and convert it. That's all a matter of personal preference, of course, though I do prefer, again, the Baby Lock brand because this one has jet air threading for that looper too, because loopers can be, particularly the looper for a cover stitch, can be a little difficult to thread. So that jet air really just kind of does it for you, and it helps out a lot. So I'm going to turn this machine around, get it all plugged in, and then we'll show you how to hem this t-shirt. Okay, I've got the cover stitch machine all set, and I've gone ahead and pinned the hem on my t-shirt. The one other thing that's a little unique about hemming with a cover stitch machine, if you want the straight stitching side to be on the outside of the garment, you actually have to hem from the wrong side of the garment. And by that I mean that I'm going to be looking at the outside as I hem, and then I have folded under to the wrong side, and what I'll have to do is kind of feel the edge of the fabric with my finger to make sure that it's lined up where I want it to go under the cover stitching. Now with a cover stitch machine, typically you do not want to start like a serger where you let it suck in. You want the needles and the to be sandwiched in, you want the fabric to be sandwiched in between the presser foot and the feed dogs with the needles on top and the looper on bottom. That way the first few stitches are going to immediately lock. So I'm putting that under. I'm going to put down the presser foot, and then I'm going to stitch. And since there isn't a blade that we're concerned about here, you can use pins with a cover stitch machine. I do prefer on a cover stitch to pull those pins instead of sewing over them. So let me just go ahead and sew until we get to where we can see where we started, because then I need to show you something. Okay, I'm going to stop right here and show you. Hopefully the camera can get this. I'm using gray thread, so it may be a little difficult to see, but I'm going to make sure that on the blog post I link that I show this in still photos close up as well. So you can see that on the front here I have my 2 top threads hanging out, and here is my thread on the back. This is my looper thread. Now if I don't lock these threads, they can easily pull out, particularly at the end here. So what I always do is I go back to where I started and I find just the first loop from the front side, and I use a pin and then I pull that through to the back side. You want to do that on each side, and then I tie all of those threads together and cut the edges. And that makes sure that my thread is locked in on the back side here. Okay, so I've overlapped by just a few stitches. I want to get my needle all the way up to the top, and then whatever on your machine releases the tension, that's what you want to do. So on this machine, when you lift the presser foot, the tension on the thread is released. And then use scissors or something flat like a corner poker thing. That's a technical term, by the way, for a point turner. And you want to get it underneath the foot and pull all those threads carefully towards you, those top threads, and then trim them. And then you want to carefully pull straight back, and you'll feel a little tension, but what will happen is it will pull magically. Those 2 threads that were on the front will get pulled to the back side, and then you can cut that looper thread, and you should have all ready for you all 3 of those threads already on the back side for you to tie them off. And that action of pulling the front threads through to the back side, that also helps lock the stitching. I just like to add the knot for a little extra security myself. So this is what a cover stitch looks like. You can see it's those 2 lines of stitching on the front, and then on the back there's that loop that runs back and forth. That's the lower looper that runs back and forth between the stitches. And because of that, it is a stretchy hem. So that's why a cover stitch machine is nice. Of course, a great way to do this instead is to use a twin needle on your regular sewing machine. It simulates this pretty closely. It's not quite as secure, like you can't pull on it as much as you can with a cover stitch machine, but it is a pretty good simulation for a whole lot less. If knits aren't something you sew all the time, or you just don't have the budget, the cover stitch machine is really nice to have, but not necessary.